Welcome, everybody, to our Sacreds of Healing meeting here. Welcoming everybody from all over the world to talk about and discuss October energies, October 2017 to be precisely. So I am welcoming you to October, although if you've noticed this, I've set these current energies discussions not at the beginning or maybe the end of the previous month to give us a forecast. I've set them at the right at the middle of the month so that we already have a little bit of a feeling for what we're dealing with, and then go forward into the resolution of things. Now, as you all know, energies don't really abide to the calendar anyway, so it's useless to really speak about October or September energies or so. What, for the most part, actually, what we're talking about is probably some of the lunar cycles. I think, you know, as an energy worker, I don't really use astrology or constellations, but I can see a definite impact of some of the major constellations and the lunar cycles being part of that. So the lunar cycles are very obvious in sort of collective energies. There's this like waning and waxing and this building and then releasing with these moon phases. So that's quite common actually, and this is also confirmed by psychology. But what we really want to look at is, you know, the deeper aspects, like how does it, well, first of all, of course, how does it make us feel, but also what does it trigger in us? What are some of the aspects that we all seem to go through simultaneously without knowing that others are actually going through the same thing because they express differently for each of us? So who is anybody here who would love to share their like sort of first impression of what you feel about, let's call them October energies, but let's just call them like the energies of the last 2-3 weeks? Who would like to share? All right, I keep talking then. This is usually what happens when I ask these questions. Yes, okay, so some people are texting, which is fine too. First chakra symptoms, yes. As all of you know, let's look at our first chakra chart here. As all of you know, this is why I do these energy updates and the videos every week. You know, there's quite a bit of root stuff going on, and this has been going on for a while, on and off. It goes into our higher chakras where it's about perception, and then it goes back down into our lower stuff. And right now it's definitely sort of this last layer of our core issues coming forward. Yes, Eloise, like giving birth. If there are any co-facilitators here today, then you will agree with this immediately. Pretty much all sessions in the last, I'd say, 2 weeks had this overall theme of rebirth, of like, you know, we see umbilical cords, we feel, we have this in-womb feeling, we're dealing with prenatal stuff, karmic family stuff, inner child stuff, and we have all these birthing pains with ourselves. This is sort of the overall setup right now. And then every week, or like every cycle, if you will, brings in sort of a different variation or a different focal point. So last week was probably tough for most of you. I'd love to hear your guys' input here. Core stuff is triggered, like really core fears, disappointment, rejection, betrayal, nobody loves me, I'm all alone. And why do I always have to do everything? This kind of stuff. With you know, depending on our personal story, the colorations or the expressions of anger and resentment behind that. You know, like, I'm sick and tired of this, you know, nobody ever supports me when I need something, this kind of stuff. This was very prevalent last week. And this week we're dealing actually with digesting the residues of it, you know, like letting go of all this repressed stuff and really moving into seeing the larger picture here. You know, what are some of the commitments that we're doing that are actually producing inner fragmentation, that are actually compromises that we shouldn't do, you know, that you know, that is not really in congruence with what we truly want, who we truly are, or commitments that we have done long time ago, that we've made long time ago, like, say, things in regards to our jobs or some of our relationships that are just no longer conducive for us anymore. And it's not really that the other conditions have changed that much. It's more that we are in the process of changing. And so some of the outer conditions, the outer circumstances, or the situations that we're in, they begin to bug us. You know, and that's something that is happening right now, which from the overall perspective or larger context, is actually a wonderful process, because it means that we are in the process of feeling our inner truth more, feeling our integrity literally, you know, when it doesn't resonate, when we're doing something, or when we you know, even if we're doing things robotically, which most of us do, you know, just because we've been doing this forever, you know, like really sort of spiking up here within us as like, wait a minute, what am I even doing here? This isn't even remotely what I came here for, or what I now need. So in the last energy update, I talked about adaptability or copeability, right? You know, it's not always that the outer conditions are responsible for these changing views, or these change of inner, you know, experiencing our world. Right now, it's actually more us changing, and it makes us see our outer world with different eyes. Does that make sense? Yes. I'm getting some text messages here. Some report karmic family stuff is releasing, you know, and coming forward. Yes. And if you're asking me as an energy coach, it's about time. It's about time that we become sovereigns, you know, and that we let go of our mommy and daddy issues. I don't mean this in a judgmental way. You know this about me. It's just that, like, guys, you know, we can't really carry our lives, you know, in front of us with all the baggage from behind of us. This is a total waste of energy. And I'm not saying that the relationships with our parents isn't important. Yes, it is in the now, but not what was in the future. Our job here is to grow up, to mature spiritually, intellectually, emotionally, and of course also physically. But to mature to a degree where we are in control of how we're feeling and what we're choosing. And if we allow our family stuff to drive the bus, to run the show, well, then we're not in control, really. And I'm not talking about control, like as in being able to control everything. Of course we can't. But if we are attached to some of the things that happen to us in childhood, and sort of the psychology of that, not that it's easy to let all that go. I'm not judging, you know, but at some point we got to make this decision. We got to make this choice to say, all right, I just accept it. I accept it. so I can move on. It's our inner resistance, not wanting to accept it, that creates the attachment. If that makes any sense. So karmic family patterns become visible to us when we are ready to let them go. And what are karmic family patterns? Those are things that we can observe that are actually, if we look at just a tiny little more or closer into it, that have been propagating, that have been sort of duplicating from one generation to another. Who of you, in the course of their own sort of self-healing efforts, has found out, maybe even to your surprise, how some of the issues that you're dealing with are actually running in your family? Is there anybody who found out that some of the issues, like be it addiction or be it like, I don't know, not being able to express emotions or the way you handle things or, manifestation issues, job issues or whatever. Is there anyone here who has found out that this is actually running through your family?
Yeah, definitely, Yona, I have.
Yeah. There's a lot
Yeah.
of yeses here in the text box for me. How did that play out for you, Eloise?
Through my mother's lineage, I
Yeah.
found that just really sort of that karmic sense of not belonging and just shutting down and isolation was quite prevalent through my mother's lineage.
How did you find out about this? Like the link to your mother's lineage? How did you work this?
Well, did the family karmic clearing with you, and I think I've done that like 5 times in transmissions with you, as well as individually at home, and it really took probably 3 years to work through that issue myself, and it just seemed to be a bit of a core sticking point for me. So it did take quite a long time to work through, but an accumulation of the transmissions and some of the other assessment tools that I use as well was able to sort of highlight different things for me.
So what was you said what you found out is that is sort of inherited in your mother's lineage is the overall sense of not belonging. The
Yes, and just the shutting down and really isolating and
mm.
just not really taking part.
So like
Um,
the kind of like did you find that also in the physical sense or maybe in a psychological
oh,
sense?
for sure, yes, on all levels, Yona. Yeah, physically, emotionally, not willing to sort of open up and really share truth, and psychologically too. Just on all levels, it just filtered right through.
Now, when you weren't aware of this yet, right? When you were a kid, say, or a teenager, what was your perspective then? Without all the like, what is your conclusion or your like?
Well, I probably knew it back then, but I didn't because it was just the truth. Whereas when you grow up and into teenage and adulthood, you just sort of start to make excuses and rationalize things, and things get in the way, and layers build up and cloud your perception. I think when I was a child, I actually could see it clearer than I could say maybe 5 or 10 years ago when I was trying to figure all this stuff out.
Well, I mean, I'm just thinking of my own things here, with my mother and all, and I must say that I did not have that understanding when I was younger. When I was a kid
Hmm.
or teenager, I came to the conclusion my mother is mean. She doesn't love me. She always
Uh-huh.
fights with me. It's like more like that. Like I went into total resistance, and I could not see
Okay.
how some of
I
these
think
things are actually duplicating.
Yes, I think probably the difference between my scenario and yours may be because I didn't find it traumatic, so um, it was sort of hidden, and it was not really impacting on me. Therefore, I really couldn't. I didn't go into resistance with it. I just saw it for what it was
Okay.
because you know what I'm trying to
So you
say there.
unconsciously basically imitated her.
Yeah,
You
I
took
know.
that as a
As much as I didn't want to, I've
uh-huh.
turned into my mother.
Interesting. See, yeah, like in my constellation, my family constellation, that was my sister. My sister turned into my mother,
Okay.
and so some of the resentments, actually, that helped me to work through some of my resentments because I saw my sister more as a sort of a victim in that whole
Mhm.
constellation, and so I felt for her, and I have a relatively good relationship with her, so I wanted her to, I wanted to understand her, and as I began to understand her more, I began to see the the mirror here with my mother, and
Yeah.
and like why it was so difficult for me to connect with both of them when I was growing up. I
Yeah.
couldn't connect with them when when I was younger. I could now. I can now. How did this then change for you? So you adapted. You sort of just took this as like this is the way it's being done. That's how you deal with things, right?
Yeah, I didn't really notice it though because my mother passed away 5 years ago now,
Okay.
and it wasn't until after that that I could see the patterns. While I was in it, I couldn't see it. I might have to add that bit in. It was only really, 12 months to 18 months ago that I really started to understand the depths of these patterns.
Now, what changed or what was set in motion when you began to see those patterns? Do you
Letting go
remember?
of false attachments and reframing how I perceived my mother. Um, or at the time, it was. I guess I was sort of in denial. I was in a false denial of everything was rosy and happy, and because I couldn't see it, it was non-traumatic for me. Therefore, there was nothing wrong with it, but I couldn't see the dysfunction because there wasn't any acute pain. I couldn't see the dysfunction under it.
So when you began to see the pattern, did you realize some of your own dysfunctions then?
Yeah, oh, 100%. Yeah, yeah. And I'm still working through that.
That's interesting. Now, and Louise, you also have children. I happen to know this because you're a hard warrior, so we had a lot of opportunity to exchange
Yeah.
some of that. But let me ask you something for those here who have not done karmic family work yet. Have you noticed a replication to your children as well?
Yes. Yeah, I can actually see it. Yes. And however, I can see it transforming before my eyes as I have changed considerably within this past 12-month period. So have they. And it's my perception that has changed, but also I've changed my behavioural patterns as well. And they're really quick to respond because they're kids. And especially in the past 3 weeks, I found it really interesting, Yona, how you said that the freedom to give people space.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that was actually what was happening. We've had school holidays here, and my boys are young adolescents, and they're off every day out playing at the park, at the skate ramp with their friends, and it's been like a 2 week period where they've just gone and come back, and it's pretty much the first time that that's been able to occur. So that's a huge, huge step in our family, even though that might seem so minor to other people. That's a really huge step that they've got the accountability and responsibility, and I've been able to allow them space, and in turn they've given me the space that I've needed as well. But I wouldn't have been able to do that had I not broken down some of the dysfunctional patterns that I was holding on that were very unconscious in
Now,
the
can you make an
past.
example? I mean, I don't mean to put you on a spot here, but this is very interesting, I think, for people who have not consciously worked on family karma.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you know, that you changed that
Okay.
then changed them?
Oh gosh, it's multi-level, but one of the, because I'm a recovering codependent as well, um, I took it. I was so enmeshed with their identity, was a reflection of my reputation, and that was huge for me. So I was forever in control of them, trying to, in damage control, um, because there's background history there, but just it was my control patterns around them to ensure that they weren't going to sort of do any damage, and therefore it replicate back onto me as a mother and my reputation in the community and so forth. But so many others. What was your? I've forgotten your question, Jonas.
No, but that's a really good example. So there was what you realized. I'm rephrasing this now, just sort of for the energetic lingo, so we can get those
Yes.
terms together. You realize that because of some of the checking out, sort of everything's fine
Yep.
pattern underneath it, you had to
Yes.
hold up that. You had to hold up that. I want to
Exactly.
say illusion, but you had to hold this up, right? You said
Oh,
something
totally.
like false identity or something, or identity. And out of that need to hold this up, you had to control your environment a lot, including the
Yeah.
children. And then
Yep.
that couldn't really produce a lot of trust, like in them.
Precisely.
And obviously, you said there was a history of things. So obviously, we all have these things with our kids. There's a lot of things that can go wrong, and often does go wrong. So
Yep.
we have good reasons, good justifications, for not
Yeah.
trusting them in certain situations.
That's,
you know.
yeah. Yeah.
But it also created this them not being able to trust themselves. You know.
Yeah. And with trust, I used to have a skewed view of what, because it just didn't seem to, I couldn't figure trust out. It took a long time. And what I eventually came to terms with was that it's almost impossible to trust somebody else per se. All you can do is really trust in yourself. And
Yes.
I've learned that if I get the feeling that something's up, to trust in that, even if they're out, and I might feel at the time, oh, hang on, this is going pear-shaped, I've got to go find them, or whatever. I just trust in that instead of the externalization of trust. Well, can I trust you? Like, I
Mhm.
shouldn't really be putting that on them. I should be trusting my own instincts and my own self-guidance, so that, and it does occur, like sometimes they say, all right, I'm off to the skate park, and it's not that I don't trust them. I have a feeling, and I trust in that feeling that something's slightly off, and I'll just say, no, guys, you're home today.
Mhm.
Or, no, you can go in the afternoon. So I'm no longer, and I'm trying to help them understand my sort of processing too, so that it's not that I'm not trusting in them, but I'm trusting in myself.
Okay, so once you opened this up, it was a little easier for them to
Yeah,
understand that there is, that
exactly.
you were working on something, that this is not set in stone, that there's something in you that is
Yes.
also contributing to this. While you were talking, I was it just sort of circling here the aspects that you brought up in just what you shared. Like the mother, like the distorted or inherited mother principle of avoidance.
Yeah.
And then as a result, sort of control and I hope you don't mind me saying this, but also the emotional manipulation that comes with it.
Yeah,
Like
definitely.
mostly your own manipulation. Like manipulating yourself emotionally
Yeah.
because you have to keep up that sort of front,
Yeah. Yep.
right?
Yep.
And so here, which also links into codependency. And
Yes.
of course all these things here, no fun, like this whole victim thing, and
Yeah.
lack of self-acceptance, lack of confidence. I mean, and then how this sort of inside of you is justified with I can't trust them, and that's
Yeah.
why I have to do this. This is the mental, the belief
Mm.
behind that. No, and here you said sense of belonging. See, I mean, we can find all this here in the first chakra chart. So
Yeah,
you actually identified this correctly right off the bat when you said all first chakra things.
yeah.
Because that's really what is unwinding right now, and in a good way. Because usually when we are confronted with first chakra issues, it just triggers core
Hmm.
stuff because it's in our source code. And if we
Yeah.
don't have the tools yet to work with those things, we just go into this endless loop of like not knowing what to do, and then just keep on repeating the robotic cycle, so to speak. Now, I'd be interested to hear, just out of curiosity, if you look at the physical aspects here, did you ever have any of these physical symptoms in your life?
Me,
Yes.
100%, Yona. Yeah, yeah. My hips used to, I had lower back pain,
Okay.
sciatica when I was 15, and at the time I was a, a very uh, competitive swimmer, so I was in tip-top shape, but yet my spine was just yeah, problematic. At the age of 15, I had really, really bad sciatica, which I'm still dealing with, and it also fed into my hips
Mm-hmm.
and adrenals,
Mm-hmm.
definitely when motherhood came.
Yeah.
For sure. And yes, lymphatic, I would say as well.
So you're like,
Coccyx,
mm-hmm.
yeah, coccyx after birth, 12 months of that
Yeah.
playing
And
up.
a typical, but very, very typical type of injury or kind of symptom, like I broke my tailbone, but
Yeah,
I
right.
have very strong first chakra issues as well.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
This happens to people who have these like really core inner child and karmic family aspects. It's usually in the first chakra. Okay. So
One
that,
thing I found, sorry, Yona, to cut you off there. I think it was just in your very latest energy update when you were referring to scars.
mm-hmm.
And something really, really interesting. My father has a scar just on the top of his ankle where um, a piece of glass just came down and just stabbed him in the
Uh-huh.
top of his ankle.
Uh-huh.
When I was 3 or 4, I noticed that I had a scar, and it was in and I still have it. It's only very faint, and it's in the exact same
Yep.
spot of where my father. And he said, "But you've never been injured there." And I remember for weeks on end we were talking about it because he couldn't get over that I had a scar precisely where his was, and yet I was never injured.
Yes. This is a very typical thing, actually, and most people are not aware of this. That, like these kind of replications can actually happen on the physical level as well. Now, we all understand DNA sort of inheritance, right? This
Mm.
goes much, much further. This goes much further. So if you like my son, for instance, I have a scar on the right side of my face. My son has a little scar on the exact same spot, and so does my other son. Both my sons have a scar on the same spot. It shows me that
Without
there's a
injury.
karmic link between them and I. My daughter doesn't. So
So was that without injury, Yona, obviously?
no, it was
Did
with
they?
injuries, but seemingly coincidental. See, I
Okay.
mean, like completely different circumstances that led to it. But
Mm-hmm.
in all our cases, all three of us, this happened right around the age of 3,
Mm-hmm.
4. Okay, so this is an interesting observation. Now, I'm not saying that you all need to be like psychic detectives here and sort of lead everything back to that. But this is all just little bits and pieces that can help us to make out certain links here. And the reason I brought in the kids, not everybody has kids, but those of you who do, and this is actually was a game changer for me. If it's not for our self-love, for our own love to ourselves, it can motivate to work on some of these things for our kids. All right. Karmic family aspects usually inherit, or at least are prevalent. I'm pretty sure they inherit much longer, many more generations, but we can see them, within sort of 7 generations, which is why the healing process for the karmic family attachments, we go back 7 generations just to make sure, okay? But we are also influencing the future of the next 7 generations that come after us. So for me, it wasn't really enough to motivation to to do this. But when I thought of my kids and my sort of the future generations, that helped me. That motivated me to go there. And just like with you, Eloisa, there's a lot of karma, family karma, that was at play in my personal healing process. And for me, probably the beginning of taking energy work seriously. This is when I realized, oh shit, there's a whole cluster of things that is tied to family karma.
Yeah, me too, actually, Jona. I agree.
And someone here is commenting. It's funny. My mom and sister needs to have the mole on the same spot. See, this is also something that is not genetically inherited, guys. Okay, so this is these things can indicate karmic ties. All right. Now, the next 2 weeks here, and thank you so much, Eloise, to be our case study, because this is so important. When we talk about these things, to make examples. That's why I want these meetings here between us, so that we can go through this a little deeper. And the reports and energy updates, I can only sort of scratch the surface, But here we actually have a chance to work with these things on a deeper level because we have the tools. All right. So for those of you in the Sacred Self-Healing course, it's step 16, where all this is explained, and where the meditation is sort of a prelude, or it's the same process as the transmission. The transmission just goes a little deeper, and like with all transmissions, if you choose to do them, then you have us sitting on the other side, and we are with you in the process and can help assist you. But thank you, Eloise, for giving us this feedback. So this karmic family and inner child stuff. So right now it seems like all about karmic family stuff, and it will move into inner child stuff as a resolution here within the next week, I'd say. And then next week, by the end of next week, there's going to be a shift there. It's new moon again. That usually happens, and there's going to be a little bit of it's almost like, all right, a new deck of cards. Let's shuffle the cards again. And there's a luck factor, an opportunity factor, a fortune factor that's coming in next week, by the end of next week. So what may happen to those of you who actually work through all of this is a liberation aspect coming in, meaning maybe something like a lucky circumstance, like I don't know, just making an example for a lucky circumstance, like an unexpected inheritance from a relative that you don't even know, or something like that coming in, helping you to release some of that, what's around those subjects, karmic family and inner child. So it's actually going to feel a lot lighter by the end of next week. We just have to go through some of the aspects in regards to our relationships here now this coming week, because karmic family stuff is usually just sort of it's the underlying weaving of a code, but then we have to look at the expressions in our lives and how does this express. Well, I've tried to exemplify this a little bit when I said, the way we felt these last weeks, like nobody loves us, I'm all alone, no support, and so forth. This will continue, and some of you may actually go through some core fears still this week, like fears as in like really feeling these hardwired things from your childhood dominating the way you see the world. Okay, and you can actually see this with the world leaders right now. And I'm not going to, judge anything or take any sides, but if you look at the overall sort of display of leadership in governments right now, sort of on this world stage, you see a lot of inner child things popping up. You see these people like, oh my God, they're having like tantrums and stuff like this, This is a whole new sort of development as compared to, like, say, maybe 5 years ago, where everything was like sort of mental, intellectual, cold. And now it's getting like really, really emotional right now. Even on this, I even see this with leaders in economy who are lashing out in a way where I'm thinking like, oh wow, that's really unprofessional. Okay, so this is when this is what happens in a clearing period, in a correctional phase that we're in right now, where all these like really deep core issues coming forward. So when I share, these outer collective conditions, that doesn't mean that you're going to have to go through them. All that means is that if you detect stuff like that being triggered in you, then just remember in the back of your mind, like, oh, okay, this is the overall situation. It's kind of like when you feel a little cold. Oh, well, it's because it's winter, But there's a lot of things that you can do about feeling cold. You could turn up the heater in your house, or you could wear warmer clothes, or you could move a little more, or, you getting what I'm, what I mean to say is like, this doesn't mean that you're doomed, to having to go through bad times. It just means that, like, okay, I got a little heads up here, if this is coming in, let me remind this, and then go into maybe looking at some of the things that, I may have inherited. What are typical examples for family karma? Probably one of the most prevalent that I see is addictions and codependencies. So if we were sort of raised in a family where there was either like alcohol, say, or other addictive patterns, they usually influence our family structure, our family energy a lot. Okay, there's a lot of issues with commitment, with trust, and the ability to freely speak up. Because when there's addictions in play and codependency, there's this like constant sort of walking on eggshells and constant sort of push and pull, projection and absorption. All right, so many of us energetically sensitives have a track record of that, coming all the way from the early childhood and the previous generations. Another one is the something that Eloise mentioned here is the externalization. What do the neighbors think? What, how do I look on the outside? Well, we all have a part of that in us, but when we, like say, grew up in a situation where there was a really strong sort of identification with a certain socioeconomic group or ethnic group or whatever, then there's usually also a lot of judgment. And then whenever there's a lot of judgment, then there's a lot of fear, of not fitting in, of not being good enough. Those are usually things that are rooted in your family karma. And then there's a variation that is something that I personally experienced. I had neither. I did have the addictive pattern in running through my families on both sides of my lineages, mother and father lineage. But I didn't have the identity part. So that was actually kind of cool. I didn't have a strong religious upbringing. I didn't have any of these, like you have to be in a certain way in order to be accepted. But I had this like really strong, like, wait a minute, I'm in the wrong movie. I don't belong into this body. you know, like an overall rejection of being in the physical. This can also be something that we have inherited from previous generations. And as you know, family karma so works, some of you may know this, this is actually something that happened in my family. My father committed suicide. My grandfather, basically, my other grandfather committed suicide through drinking himself to death. You know, things like that. Slow suicide, you know, like alcoholism or drug addiction, those are forms of slow suicide. Okay, so these things can all be inherited in our families, as well as, of course, the coping mechanisms, you know, such as I don't want to be like my parents, so I go into the other direction and I become, like, say, overly mental or overly cold. You know, like my family was like super dramatic and super emotional, and then we become like overly sort of rational. It still ties us to our family karma. It's just the sort of the other side of the coin. Okay, so this is how family karma can show up, and of course the associated control and trust issues that we have. So this is the theme here for these weeks. But then comes a shift, and that actually allows us to move into a whole new level of freedom, of liberty. And this we will see also reflected in the outside. Okay, so we'll see this in our societies, no matter where we live, maybe on the geopolitical and financial level. This is like what connects us all, you know, regardless of where we're from. And you'll see the attempt to regulate things, to find new laws, to come forward with sort of new rules. And these rules, if they're coming from an unprocessed place, which most governments right now are, they will try to restrict our freedom. And we will feel this, you know, such as freedom of speech, for instance, the freedom to invest money into whatever we want to, or the freedom to, I mean, this can go all the way to, not within the next week, but on the longer run, can go all the way to the freedom to carry cash, the freedom to have gold. This has happened before. All right, so we'll see movements of that, and we'll see the counter movement, which is the trying to break free from these rules, trying to break free from these almost like outdated attempts to control us. So control and trust, these are the key words here for the next 3-4 weeks. And but there's a positive development there, as opposed to the last kind of 6 weeks. You know, since July, this has all been cooking, just sort of like really sort of unwinding just, and now it's actually coming into release and into a more positive expression. Then by the end of month, we'll feel, you know, a lot more peace around some of the global developments, and maybe also, that's what I'm hoping, you know, some of the earth changes, you know, the fires, the earthquakes, the floods, the hurricanes, calming down a bit. All right, but we got, you know, 2 more weeks of that. And then by the beginning of November, you know, these new regulations, they're going to try to force this through, and also in our families or relationships. And if you haven't really gotten it until then, the beginning of November is the time where you're going to have to really work on your boundaries. Really work on, like, what is okay for me and what is not. What do I want, but how do I want this? What am I willing to compromise and what not? And to gain clarity about this. So the next energetic adjustment session is about inner vision and clarity, to prepare you for this. because the problem with boundaries is that it's really difficult for us to express our boundaries. Well, first of all, to feel them. You're in the process of decoding this right now. You know, you're beginning to feel when something doesn't, you know, just doesn't feel true. It doesn't feel right. You know, and you're beginning to feel your compromises now. And right now it's a bit emotional, you know, so you feel it here, you know. And of course, first chakra is what we talked about with some of the examples that Eloise made, you know, legs, hips, you know, this area here. And then, you know, we're now dealing with the emotional implications of that, you know, sort of what it triggers in us and how we cope with it. And I'm expecting a lot of addictive patterns flaring up, okay, in the first week of November. But all just to really get to this place where we can use our solar plexus, our third chakra energies in a positive way. And that is not to try overpowering other people, not to try to do damage control as Eloise identified, you know, to control or manipulate. But in order to really know who we are and where our boundaries are, and this is like, okay, I'm going this far, but not further. This will help us to make commitments to take more responsibility. But it will also put us in a place to claim this from others. So here, the last weeks were all about space, you know, freedom and giving space and freedom. Now we're getting to the place where, like, you've got to have this worked out inside of you, because if you're not, then, you know, you'll be overrun by things again. Or people or systems will try to overpower you. And then you'll feel like a victim again. Okay, so the beginning of November, you know, will challenge that. Will challenge your boundaries. So do the work now. And understand how your inner child, or what role your inner child, you know, these unresolved parts of you, these traumas and unconscious coping mechanisms. Addiction is just one, control is another. Dissociation, a lot of you guys are dissociators, where you just sort of cut yourself off, you numb yourself from things. How these play into the larger scope of your relationships and the boundaries. So this week, you know, in the energy of that is that no more compromises, no more half-ass. Because in 2-3 weeks from now, you're going to have to be very clear about this. And then just to give you a little bit of a larger view on things, then in December, there's a whole sort of new energy restructuring taking place. And this can mean that some of you like actually start a whole new job, or that you start a new relationship. And on a political, financial level, this means that the whole new system is starting. A whole new society is in the birthing stage. So what we have been experiencing here is birthing pain for our true self here in these past months is now sort of moving into the outer levels, into the larger collective. And we'll see the manifestations of that. Again, here, just the beginnings of a new structure, a new system in our society, in the beginning of December. And there can be a lot of pain involved in that. I'm actually seeing like a lot of people losing their pension funds. This is not really that clairvoyant. This is actually, there's a lot of indications for that. So people who have trusted in the system to provide for them, you know, may have to go through some loss there. All right. But you know, as always, you know, in these things is also a good message, and the message is right now is a wonderful opportunity, especially next week, to change things. right? Because there's going to be there's going to be a little bit of luck involved. So what I'm asking you to do, or not asking you, but what I want to remind you guys to do is pay attention right now. Be really open. Let go of some of your beliefs that are so ingrained that you don't even question them. You know, like really open up and try to see new things, because there's a lot of new things happening right now. And when I said last week, I think I said, or 2 weeks ago, try to find the third option. You know, our mind is so set in like it's going to be either that way or that way. Train yourself to see the third option, the one that you cannot see yet, and learn to trust in that one. That's the one that's going to bring the opportunity, the fortune to you. Yeah, so this was like sort of my part here. And now we are actually good in time. We have time for questions. Please ask questions, you know, about your own energy, about collective energies. Doesn't matter.
You know, an observation I've had about myself in the past number of months is I've been able to tell after doing some transmissions, either participating or co-facilitating, that I've been releasing a lot of deep stuff. And, you know, I started realizing a difference in the feelings of depth when it finally occurred to me during the meditation I was having by myself that a lot of the deeper releases I've been having in the past, say, I don't know, 5 or 6 months had more to do with karmic family stuff than anything. And so it's come to mind, well, actually the message during the meditations were, don't worry about trying to figure it out, just let it go, just let it release. Sometimes it's not so important for me to figure out what the origin was of something, and just release it and let it go. Yeah.
But, you know, Brian, I just happen to know this about you because, again, you are a heart warrior as well. So we had a lot of chance to talk about these things. That, you know, there's a sort of a natural succession to that. So in the beginning, when you first became aware of some of these things, right, it was all about just opening up for it, you know, like actually seeing, you know, how some of the things in our family, how they are still affecting us. Because, you know, we're all adults, you know, we're not necessarily like assuming that there's stuff from our family that is, other than maybe like some of the obvious things, but that is influencing our energy on such a deep level. So at first it's mostly like sort of mentally understanding him, and then it's very common, and this is something that happened to you too, Brian, is like this going through some of the emotional ramifications of it, like digesting the emotions. And now, because you have, through the dedication that you have, working through these things, now you're getting to a point where you are really not judging any of this anymore. You're more neutral to it, you're like, okay, I know I got some stuff, and yeah, I did some psychic detective work. I kind of know sort of the general patterns, but I don't really have to go into like analyzing it more, All I really got to do is like allowing this when this pops up for me, to sort of give a little signal here. Hey, there's this, whatever it is that you're experiencing right now is linked to maybe some karmic stuff, that has to do with the family. And then we let go of this resistance. I think this is what you just described.
Yes.
Yes. It's a form of surrender to it, where you don't really need to like explain or justify, go against it, or like do any. There's no doingness really involved with this anymore. It's just like acknowledging it, So this is what I see, what I heard you say, with this acceptance you know, all these things begin to dissipate much faster. Like there's no like really biting onto something or trying, needing to resolve it or something. It's just like, okay, I understand. I have some karmic family stuff, and not all of it is aware to me. You know, a lot of it is the core stuff. But in this acceptance, there's healing already, and the letting go and the surrendering. And that then allows me to go past it and to actually take my own.
I also notice, well, I also noticed accompanying all those feelings, Yona, I was having this really strange undercurrent of a feeling consistently, or I have been, I continue to. And it was kind of freaking me out. And then I realized what it was I'm feeling lighter. Mm-hmm. And my ego's been going nuts over that. Yeah, like it's
what does that mean
sensation.
When your ego goes nuts? How does that feel?
Oh, well, you know, what I describe as brain noise. I mean, you hear 5,000 voices of trying to be rational with you. You know, you have to make sense. That doesn't make sense what you're going through, and all. You know, your ego's just going nuts. All this inner dialogue and critical inner voice and like that. Uh-huh. When that goes off, it usually means I'm on the right track about something. I'm really disturbing my critical inner voice because it's protesting. So I usually have to do the opposite of whatever it's suggesting.
Okay.
When it's that strong.
That sounds like a really good plan. You just do the opposite of whatever you
I finally got to the point where I'm not so mental about it. I'm not questioning what the results will be or even projecting what the results will happen if I go completely opposite and just drop everything and go the other way, because it's going to be the way it is. And so I finally kind of let go of worrying about what expectations I may have had around the situation. And you just deal with them as they pop up.
Yeah, this is a really good tip, actually, for people listening here. You know, like if you don't really have sort of an inner roadmap yet, or a guidance that tells you, you know, what you're dealing with, or, you know, sort of what kind of tools you should use, you know, is to generally just acknowledge that you have something like an ego, and that the ego is most likely fully involved in everything, inner child, everything, family stuff, everything, sort of coping, okay? This is like your ego's domain, all right? And that if you want to work on it, that one a really, really good tool is to question what your ego suggests. That's really the probably one of the most useful tips that I've received on my journey early on, was like, it's all backwards. So whenever you think you've got this figured out, you know, it's probably the other way around. You know, something along those lines, you know, or whenever your ego says, yeah, let's do that. Or whenever your ego says, oh my God, not in a million years. You know, I've become, on my journey, very, very careful with statements like this, because it's like almost systematic that everything that I've ever said in my life, I'm never, ever going to do this. This is exactly what I'm doing today. And
you know, also, Yona, whenever my ego, there are occasions where my ego has just stopped talking. And when I've come to a conclusion about something that have been rationalized, and all the brain noise and rationale has been going on, and then all of a sudden everything, I come to a conclusion, it just quiets. Then I know I've made the wrong choice, you know, because it's not voicing everything.
It's not, interesting. You know, yeah. So you're not hearing the protester in the background, so you know, like, wait a minute, you agree with it? That's a bad sign.
Yeah.
Kind of like that.
Yeah, it took me a while to figure that one out for myself, but I know I can go there if I have to. So
that's a tricky one, but I get it, you know, because usually it's that the noise that you're referring to, right? This constant.
Yeah, well, your rationale, again, your ego, you know, it tries to, get you in the line, or it got me conditioned in the line of thinking that, oh, well then if shut up, that means all systems go, everything's good, you made the right choice, and like that. But really, it's, for me, it's been the opposite. It literally has been the opposite. Whatever the ego says or doesn't do or whatever, I just do the opposite.
Yeah, for those of us who are more sort of on the mental side of things, that I think is a good advice. All right. For those of us who are more on the emotional side of things, this won't work, okay? Because, that will just sort of increase the drama. For those of us more on like having issues with being pulled into constant dramas all the time and sort of perceiving our world, as like being pushed or pulled or, driven, doing things or needing to drive other people into doing things, it's best to actually just go into the calmness of things. So it's more the constant noise itself that is part of the coping mechanism. Actually, something that came forward in this session, in this transmission that we had today here at transCODES, the distraction, projection, and ignoring things. That is something that comes in for, especially for people who have a lot of, or who feel like the victim of their own emotionality all the time. Okay, so for those of us more in that place, it's better to go into the calmness and the silence. For those of us on the more mental side, it's good to do it like Brian does it, question the calmness, because that's usually a sign that you're sort of on the way to just fulfilling the program, fulfilling the loop. Okay, so that's kind of like, for those of us, and there are quite a few actually here, who have more of spiritual issues with things, like having a hard time bringing things together that connect with the larger purpose of things, and maybe sometimes even intertwined with religious beliefs and so forth. It'd be more important to go into the connection with that part, but stop seeing it as something outside of us, and more going inside and saying, okay, there's no God out there that's going to punish me if I make a mistake. My karma, so to speak, is how things play out. If if I'm more congruent, then my karma develops in a more sort of congruent and lighter direction. And if I am, going into like just repeating things over and over again and going into resistance with it, then my life is going to be in resistance with me. So to go more into inner connection and really trying to see the larger purpose of things. By the way, this is also something where, investigating some of the karmic aspects, especially the karmic family aspects, can be of really great help to see how all this is connected. What are the things that my parents had to go through in their lives and resolve that they haven't resolved yet? And how much of that do I still carry in me? How much am I still influenced with that? And often the spiritual beliefs that I've taken on from them in the course of that. So that's how karma work can really help us decode some of these programs, these loops, these patterns that we have. And especially, of course, for those of you who seem to be running into the same type of issues with relationships. Here is a really, really big one. And statistics in couple counseling are overwhelming. 85% of us relive the exact same issues that our parents have sort of modeled to us in one way or another, not always in the exact same way, we often also do the opposite. So, like, say, if my mother, was the more receiving end of things, and my father was more sort of the pushing out part, then I may sort of develop in the opposite direction, and then everything that I felt like my father did wrong, I'm doing this actually, and then everything that my mother how my mother responded to it, I find that in my husband, and vice versa. There's many different constellations, but there's often very strong connections, and this can actually help us to decode some of the issues that we have especially the repetitive issues that we have with our relationships. So there's a good healing possible here in October. Yes, yes, and some of you are confirming this here in the texting part. Yeah, so there's good healing opportunities and luck. Okay, so stay on it, guys. Don't give up. If you have things where you feel like completely stuck, listening to the energy updates, the videos, always helps. Come to the meetings that we have here. We always talk about a different subject, but then again, just because we are all humans and it plays into like our perception at the moment, we often reflect on the connection with current collective energies, in our regular step meetings, and especially in the workshops. And if there are no more questions, then that leads me to reminding you that we have something very cool coming up next Saturday, namely the promised, let me see, do I have this here? The promised cryptocurrency special. So for those of you, this is something I promised, like, I don't know, like 6 months ago or something. We're actually going to have a cryptocurrency specialist here, but he's also very spiritual in his way, and he's actually an energy worker, which means that we can talk about these things in regards to, like, what does it actually mean for our journey? What is all this talk about Bitcoin and so forth, and why does she even bring this up? Okay, so we're going to investigate this next Saturday here with Sebastian Hoot. He's going to be in Peru at the time. And it's a really, really cool perspective that he's going to bring in. And I want to remind you guys, this is free for you guys, so please don't pay. This is free for every Sacred Self-Healing member. And remember that it's at 9 a.m. Denver time, Mountain Time. It's at 9 a.m. It's an unusual time for you. Okay? So this may make it easier for some of you to come. May make it harder for some of you to come, but that's the only time I could get with him. Okay, so next Saturday, 21st of October, here at 9 a.m., we're going to be talking about cryptocurrencies, the whole workshop around this. So I'm really excited about this. All right. Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming and for joining in here and for sharing. This is really cool to have you guys talk about your, some of the insights that you had, and the practical examples that this can give to us. This is a really, really cool treasure, okay, when you do this. Yes, thank you, everybody, and I wish you a wonderful rest of the weekend, a wonderful rest of October. Okay, so try to see the opportunity in things, all right? Okay.
Thanks, Jona.
Thank you. All the best to you.
See
Bye-bye.
ya.